I'm Lena, 32 years old, and until a few months ago, I truly believed I had the perfect marriage. But everything changed one night at 2:17 a.m. when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Half asleep, I grabbed it, thinking it was some late-night spam. But it wasn't. It was a location tag from my husband, Mark. He told me he was on a business trip in Chicago. But his phone was pinging from a cabin at Pinebrook Lake, 3 hours away. For a full minute, I just stared at that little red dot on the map. My heart was racing, my hands shaking. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, but deep down I knew. That dot wasn't just a location. It was the truth I'd been too afraid to face. He kissed me goodbye that morning, told me he loved me. But that night I realized my marriage wasn't love. It was a lie. What I did next wasn't out of heartbreak. It was out of clarity. Have you ever felt that gut-deep feeling that something's wrong, but you can't prove it yet? Then you already know exactly what I felt that night. Stay with me till the end, because what I uncovered didn't just end my marriage. It changed who I am. And before we dive in, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if your partner's business trip led somewhere they were never supposed to be? Mornings in our house used to smell like freshly brewed coffee and burnt toast. That was Mark's specialty, burning toast and somehow pretending it was his signature crunch. I'd wake up to the sound of the coffee machine gurgling and his off-key humming drifting in from the kitchen. It was our little ritual. He'd make breakfast, I'd pack his lunch, and we'd talk about our day like normal married people. Except lately nothing about us felt normal. I remember that particular morning so clearly. The sun spilling through the curtains, our dog snoring at my feet, the smell of his new cologne lingering in the air. The kind of scent that wasn't mine to pick. He'd started wearing it about a month ago, saying a client had recommended it. I'd smiled and said it smelled nice, but inside, I felt something twist. When I walked into the kitchen, he was already dressed. Dark suit, crisp white shirt, phone in hand. "You'll be gone the whole week?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He smiled. That same easy, practiced smile that had once made me fall for him. "Yeah. Chicago again. Meetings, clients, same old grind." Same old grind. I nodded, poured my coffee, and leaned against the counter. "You'll call when you land?" "Of course." He didn't look up. His thumbs were busy flying over his phone screen. "Who's that?" I asked lightly, pretending not to care. "Just work." I wanted to believe him. God, I did. We'd been married for 6 years. Met in college. Him, the confident business major. Me, the quiet design student. He was the kind of guy who filled every room he entered, all charm and laughter. And I was the girl who sat on the sidelines, sketching quietly, hoping someone like him would notice me. And he did. Back then, Mark made me feel like the only person in the world. He'd bring me coffee during late-night study sessions, whispering, "You work too hard, Lena." We'd talk for hours about our dreams. A small house, a big life, maybe kids someday. But dreams have a funny way of fading quietly, not crashing, not burning, just slipping out of reach. Somewhere between career promotions, sleepless nights, and constant deadlines, we stopped laughing together. We stopped seeing each other. He'd come home late, smelling like the city and stress, and I'd be sitting on the couch pretending not to notice the lipstick smudges on his coffee mug, even when they weren't mine. Maybe I'm overthinking. That's what I told myself over and over. Because good wives don't accuse. They trust. I started noticing little things. His shirts, freshly pressed when he left, but smelling faintly of perfume when he returned. Not mine. His phone always face down. His sudden interest in fitness. Gym twice a day, new haircuts, whitening strips, cologne that smelled like temptation in a bottle. But every time I tried to bring it up, he'd make me feel crazy. "You're imagining things, Lena. You know I'd never do that." And I wanted to believe him. Because believing the lie was easier than facing the truth. One evening, my best friend Rachel came over for wine night. We'd known each other since high school. She was the kind of friend who could read me like a book. "So," she said, swirling her glass, "Mark's out of town again?" "Yeah." "Chicago." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Chicago again, huh? You sure he doesn't have a secret family there?" I laughed a little too quickly. "Don't be ridiculous." She chuckled, but her tone softened. "I'm just saying, Lynn. You've been different lately. Distant." "We're just busy," I said, avoiding her eyes. "You sure that's all it is?" Her question hung in the air. I hated that she asked it, not because it was unfair, but because it was the same question I asked myself every night when I couldn't sleep. After she left, I stood by the window staring out at the quiet street. The house felt emptier than usual. Our framed wedding photo sat on the mantel, his arm around me, both of us smiling like we believed it would last forever. I touched the glass gently and whispered, "What happened to us?" No answer, of course. Just silence. The next morning, Mark was packing his suitcase. He hummed while folding his shirts, the same calm, practiced movements of a man with nothing to hide. "You sure you don't want to come with me?" he teased, glancing at me. "You know I can't," I said. "Big project deadline." Right. He zipped his suitcase and smiled. "You worry too much, Lena. I'll be fine." I nodded, forcing a smile. But the truth was, I wasn't worried about him being fine. I was worried about what he was doing when I wasn't around. As he kissed me goodbye, I noticed something, the faint scent of someone else's perfume on his collar. My stomach turned, but I said nothing. I'd learned that silence kept the peace. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation we'd had in the last few weeks. Every lie disguised as small talk. Every smile that didn't reach his eyes. The house was too quiet. Even the refrigerator's hum felt louder than usual. I reached out to his side of the bed, cold, empty. The chill seeped through my fingers like loneliness itself. His scent still lingered on the pillow, crisp, expensive, unfamiliar. My mind wandered back to when things were good. The night he proposed, down on one knee, trembling, stuttering. He'd said, "You're my forever, Lena." I'd believed him without question. But forever, it turns out, comes with an expiration date. Days passed the same way, polite calls, miss you texts, promises of souvenirs from Chicago. He'd send photos of conference rooms and coffee cups, but something about them always felt staged. Too clean. Too perfect. One afternoon I got a text from him saying, "Meeting ran late. Ordering room service." I smiled politely at my phone, the way you do when you're pretending not to care. But that night, as I was scrolling through our shared photo app, one he never remembered to log out of, I saw something strange. A picture of a dinner table. 2 glasses. A candle. His hand in the corner of the frame. But the reflection in the wine glass showed another hand. A woman's hand. Perfect nails. Red polish. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, but instead I saved the photo quietly. I didn't even confront him. Because if I'd learned anything in 6 years of marriage, it was that Mark was a world-class liar. And if I was going to find the truth, I'd have to be smarter than him. So I played the part. The loving wife. The patient listener. I texted him sweetly, sent him pictures of our dog, even said, "I love you" at night. But inside I was planning. Watching. Waiting. Every time he left for another business trip, I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. Every time he said, "Don't wait up," I wrote it down. The dates, the excuses, the times. Patterns started to appear. And one evening when he left his iPad on the kitchen counter, I found the confirmation email. Reservation. Pinebrook Lake Cabin. 2 guests. Check-in Friday, check-out Monday. My hands went numb. My heart pounded so hard I could barely hear myself think. 2 guests, I whispered aloud. Not one. Not business. Not Chicago. I sank into the kitchen chair, staring at the screen. For a moment, everything felt distant. The ticking clock, the low hum of the fridge, the faint rain tapping against the window. I'd always imagined betrayal would come with shouting, slamming doors, maybe tears. But in that moment it came quietly, through a glowing screen, a single line of text that tore my world in two. And still I said nothing. Because I wasn't ready to lose control. Not yet. I closed the iPad, took a long breath and whispered to myself, "Okay, Mark. Let's see what kind of story you're really telling." That night I sat in the dark, staring at my reflection in the window. Eyes red, heart heavy but mind sharp. I didn't know it then, but his next trip wasn't for business. It was for betrayal. When Mark left for his so-called business trip, the house went quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt hollow. I stood at the window as his car disappeared down the street, taillights blinking like tiny lies fading into the dark. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But something inside me kept whispering, check. I ignored it at first. Tried to drown it out with work, music, anything. But the silence in that house had a way of amplifying every thought I didn't want to have. Around lunchtime I was sorting through my emails when a notification popped up. Our shared calendar app. Mark never used it properly. Half the time he forgot it even synced to his phone. The little gray circle next to his name blinked, showing an automatic location tag. I didn't mean to open it. My hand just moved before my mind could stop it. Location: Pinebrook Lake, Cabin 12. I frowned. My first thought was, that's weird. Maybe he's visiting a client nearby, or there's a company retreat, But Chicago? Pinebrook Lake was in the opposite direction. My heart started beating faster, but my mind scrambled to make excuses for him. Maybe the GPS glitched. Maybe it's an old location saved by accident. Anything to protect the image I had of us. I closed my laptop, stood up and paced the living room. The more I told myself not to worry, the louder that quiet voice inside me got. I opened LinkedIn, searching for his company page. I checked his coworkers' posts, updates, check-ins. Everyone was in Chicago last month, not this week. No one's in Chicago. My fingers trembled as I typed out a message to one of his colleagues, pretending it was casual. "Hey, just checking. Is Mark attending the client summit this week in Chicago?" The reply came a few minutes later. "Client summit? There's none scheduled this month. Thought he was taking personal time." Personal time. I felt the words hit like a punch to the gut. I stared at my reflection in the laptop screen. Tired eyes, forced calm. I whispered to myself, don't jump to conclusions. Don't do it yet. I needed proof. I needed something undeniable. I scrolled back through our old messages. Running late tonight. Dinner with clients. Conference call. Don't wait up. Each one seemed harmless on its own, but when you read them all at once, they felt like breadcrumbs leading to something ugly. I dug deeper. Credit card statements, hotel receipts, travel confirmations, all there but none quite matching his stories. The dates overlapped in ways that didn't make sense. The more I searched, the less I found peace. I called his office, my voice shaking but steady enough. "Hi, this is Lena Carter, Mark's wife. I just wanted to confirm his travel schedule for the week." There was a pause. The receptionist, cheerful and polite, said, "Oh, Mark's on vacation this week, isn't he?" The air left my lungs. Vacation. Yes, he requested time off. I think he mentioned going somewhere quiet. Off the grid. Off the grid. I hung up without another word. The room suddenly felt smaller. The ticking of the wall clock grew deafening. For the first time in years, I realized I didn't know where my husband really was, or who he was with. That night I called Rachel. My voice cracked as soon as she said hello. "He's not in Chicago," I whispered. "He's at some lake, Pinebrook. And his office says he's on vacation." Rachel went quiet for a moment. Then softly, Lena, you have to find out. You deserve to know. What if I'm wrong? I said. Then you'll have peace. But if you're right, she trailed off, you'll finally see the truth. After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time just listening to the rain outside. I could feel my pulse in my throat, heavy and uneven. The next morning, I woke up exhausted but determined. My hands shook as I dialed the number I'd found for the Pinebrook Lake cabin rentals. I told myself I'd hang up before anyone answered, but I didn't. Pinebrook Rentals, how can I help you? A friendly woman's voice chirped. My throat felt dry. Hi, yes, I'm calling to confirm a reservation. My husband booked a cabin there under the name Mark Carter. Sure, give me a second. She typed something on her keyboard. Yes, I see it. Cabin 12, check-in Friday, check-out Monday. Right, I said, my voice steadying. And could you just remind me how many guests are on the reservation? 2 guests, she replied casually. 2 guests. The words echoed in my head louder and louder until I could barely hear anything else. Ma'am? Are you still there? Yes, I whispered. Thank you. I hung up. My whole body was trembling. It was like the floor beneath me had just cracked open. 2 guests. Not 1. Not business. 2. I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. I couldn't cry. I couldn't scream. I felt empty. You spend years building a life with someone, learning their habits, their rhythms, their favorite breakfast order, and then in 1 second a stranger's voice can tear it all down. I wanted to call him, demand an explanation. But what would he say? He'd lie like he always did. And I'd want to believe him like I always did. But not this time. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in front of my laptop again. I zoomed in on the map. Pinebrook Lake, a small town surrounded by dense woods, far enough away to feel secret. There were maybe a dozen cabins, each hidden under the cover of trees. My mind started piecing it together. The business trips, the sudden gym obsession, the new cologne, the late-night texts. It was her. Whoever she was, she'd been there all along, hiding in plain sight. I started to imagine what they might be doing there. Laughing over wine, cooking dinner, sleeping in a bed that wasn't ours. Every image cut deeper than the last. But with every wave of pain came something else. A new, steady kind of anger. Quiet, controlled, focused. I wasn't going to cry about it anymore. I'd done enough of that. I was going to see it for myself. Over the next day, I played my part perfectly. Texted him in the morning, "Hope your meetings go well today, Red Heart." He replied, "Thanks babe, long day ahead." My lips curved into a humorless smile. That night, I opened my closet and pulled out my small travel bag. Just the essentials: jeans, a sweater, camera, charger. I hesitated before adding the small voice recorder Rachel had once gifted me as a joke, saying, "You should start that podcast of yours one day." I never thought I'd use it like this. I left a note on the counter for appearances, gone to visit Rachel for the weekend. Short, simple, innocent. Then I turned off my phone's location services. I took one last look around the house I thought was our home, and whispered, "You wanted to play games, Mark. Let's see who wins." As I stepped into my car, the night air felt heavier than usual, thick with unspoken truths. The engine hummed softly beneath my shaking hands. Pinebrook Lake was 3 hours away. 3 hours of silence. 3 hours of replaying every memory, every "I love you," every lie. I drove past the city lights until they faded into darkness, replaced by the soft hum of country roads and the glow of my headlights slicing through the night. The further I drove, the colder it got, both outside and inside me. My mind was a storm, fear, anger, curiosity, all colliding. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm right? The road twisted through forests and mist, the kind of place where secrets could easily hide. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my heart pounding with a strange mix of dread and purpose. Every mile I drove was another piece of my old life falling away. When I finally saw the wooden sign, "Welcome to Pinebrook Lake," my breath caught. It looked peaceful, almost innocent. Small cabins tucked between pine trees, smoke curling from chimneys, the faint shimmer of the lake under the moonlight. But beneath that quiet surface I could feel it, the truth waiting for me. I slowed the car, heart hammering. Somewhere in those woods was cabin 12. Somewhere in that cabin was my husband. And whoever he was with. I pulled over near the trees, turned off the headlights, and sat there in the dark for a long minute, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. I thought of all the times I'd defended him to my friends. All the times I'd swallowed my suspicions. All the times I'd blamed myself for feeling unloved. That woman in the cabin, she wasn't just stealing my husband. She was stealing my story. I took a deep breath, reached for my phone, and whispered to myself, "All right, Lena. Let's find out what kind of man you really married." I stepped out of the car. The air was sharp and cold. The gravel crunched under my boots as I moved closer, each step echoing louder in my chest. And in that moment, I wasn't the same woman who'd watched him leave days ago. I was someone else now, someone who wasn't afraid to face the truth. So I packed a bag. I told no one. And I drove toward Pinebrook Lake. The drive through the woods felt endless. The road narrowed until the trees leaned in close, branches scraping the sides of my car like whispers warning me to turn back. Headlights cut through patches of fog, and rain began to fall in thin, slanted lines across the windshield. The sound of it filled the car, soft and steady like a heartbeat. Every mile I drove, I told myself I might be wrong. That maybe there was some reasonable explanation. An emergency meeting, a change of plans, a surprise he hadn't told me about. But deep down, I knew the truth was waiting for me, and hope hurts worse than the truth ever could. When I reached the small dirt road that led toward the cabins, I killed my headlights. The night was dark, except for a faint yellow glow in the distance. Cabin 12. I parked behind a cluster of trees, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I stepped out quietly, my shoes crunching against the wet gravel. The air was cold enough to sting, and each breath came out in small clouds that disappeared too fast. I followed the curve of the road until I could see the cabin clearly through the pine branches. It looked peaceful, warm, like something out of a storybook. Inside, soft music was playing. And I saw him. Mark. He was standing by the counter, sleeves rolled up, laughing at something. His shoulders were relaxed, his face open and alive in a way I hadn't seen in months. For a moment I almost smiled before I saw her. She was younger, maybe late 20s. Light brown hair tied in a messy bun, wearing one of his shirts. Lila. I recognized her from a company dinner months ago, one of the new hires he'd mentioned in passing. Just a kid, he'd said. Ambitious but harmless. My breath caught, fogging the glass of the cabin window as I leaned closer from the shadows. They were cooking together. She was teasing him about burning the pasta. He leaned down, kissed her shoulder, and she giggled, swatting him away. It was such a small, ordinary moment, so intimate in its simplicity, that it shattered me completely. My knees went weak. I pressed a hand to my mouth to keep from making a sound. I wanted to scream, to bang on the window, to tear the door open and demand to know how he could do this to me. But my body wouldn't move. I was frozen there, caught between disbelief and devastation. Tears blurred my vision. I pulled out my phone almost without thinking and hit record. The camera lens shook as I zoomed in. His hand on her waist, her laughter, their little dance in the kitchen. I wanted to capture every second of it. Not because I needed proof. I needed power. I needed something that made the pain useful. The minutes stretched on. They sat down to eat. He poured her wine. "They toasted to us," she said, and I heard it clearly through the thin glass. Something inside me broke then. The sound of that word cracked open a part of me I'd been holding together for years. I stepped back from the window, swallowing a sob. My reflection looked ghostly in the glass. Pale, hollow, eyes red with fury and grief. I could have gone inside. I could have made a scene, thrown the truth in his face, demanded justice right there. But as I stood in the rain, shaking, watching the man I loved treat another woman like she was his world, I realized that confrontation wasn't what I wanted anymore. He didn't deserve my pain. He didn't deserve the satisfaction of seeing how much he'd destroyed me. No. He deserved something quieter. Something colder. I sat in my car for a long time, the heater humming softly, my face damp with rain and tears. My hands rested on the steering wheel, still trembling. In the rearview mirror, I saw the cabin's light flicker as they moved into the bedroom. I whispered to myself, "That's enough. You've seen enough." But inside, another voice, low, steady, unrecognizable, answered, "Not yet." I replayed the video I'd recorded. Each frame burned itself into my mind. The lies, the laughter, the betrayal. And slowly, the ache inside me started to turn into something else. Something sharper. That night, parked under the cover of pine trees and Heartbreak, I made a decision. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I was going to let him believe he'd gotten away with it. He'd come home to me, smiling, spinning another story about client dinners and delayed flights. And I'd nod just like always, pretending to believe him. I'd cook dinner. I'd ask about his day. I'd kiss him goodnight. But this time I'd be the one with the secret. That night, my silence became my sharpest weapon. By morning I already knew what I would do. I'd drive home, clean up my face, erase the evidence of tears. And when he returned, I'd play the part of the loving wife one last time. Because revenge, I realized, wasn't about screaming or fighting. It was about letting him walk straight into the storm I was about to create. As dawn broke over the lake, pale light stretching across the water, I started the car and whispered the words that would carry me through the days ahead. He has no idea what's coming. I drove back home that night in silence, the road stretching endlessly under the early morning sky. My hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, but inside, everything was alert, tense, sharp. I hadn't cried. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't confronted him. And that was the point. By keeping my composure, I had already gained the first edge. When I walked through the front door, the house smelled of our old life. The faint scent of coffee lingering on the counter, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the worn couch cushions waiting for him. Nothing had changed. Nothing would change, at least not yet. I went straight to the bedroom, dropped my bag and turned on the bedside lamp. I deleted every photo I had taken from my phone. Every frame of him and Lila laughing, cooking, touching, gone. I didn't need them anymore. They were no longer evidence of betrayal. They were fuel for what was coming. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I realized something I hadn't admitted before. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was awake. Awake to what I had ignored for months. Awake to what I deserved. And most importantly, awake to the truth about myself. In the following days, I acted normal. Perfectly normal. Smiling, cooking dinner, laughing at his jokes, asking about his business trip as if I had no idea. Inside, I was already planning, already reshaping every move I would make. First, it was subtle. I mirrored his lies. I came home late some nights, just like he had, always with an excuse ready. Work ran long, I'd say, voice calm, tone precise. He noticed. "You okay, Em?" he asked one evening, a flicker of concern in his eyes. I smiled lightly, looking down at my phone. "Just busy. You know how work gets." He nodded, and I could see the frustration mixed with curiosity. The first cracks had begun. I started keeping track of everything. Finances, schedules, habits. I consulted a lawyer quietly, under the guise of needing advice for a freelance project. She didn't know the full story, and I didn't need her to. But with her help, I began moving shared accounts strategically. Small transfers, careful allocations. Enough that, if needed, I could leverage the situation legally. Then came the discovery that made my pulse quicken. Mark had been misusing his company card. Subtle, just small personal expenses disguised as client meetings. A hotel in Chicago that he had never checked into. Dinner bills that didn't match any conference. I felt a thrill I hadn't felt in years. This was leverage, tangible and precise, and it belonged to me. Every step I took was deliberate. I made him feel in control while quietly dismantling his world. I invited him to review joint tax documents, framing it as routine. He signed them without hesitation, bragging about his meticulousness. Little did he know, every line would serve as proof against him. Every signature, another knot tightening around the lie he had spun. At home I shifted my energy. Gone was the version of me who waited, anxious, wondering if he'd ever love me the way I loved him. In its place was someone sharper, calmer, patient. Someone who knew the rules of his game and was learning to play better. He taught me to lie, I whispered to myself one night, standing at the window and staring at the dark city beyond. But I learned to weaponize the truth. I began setting small traps, orchestrating moments where he would unwittingly reveal more than he intended. I spoke casually about upcoming projects at work, leaving traces of conversations where he could hear, hints of important dinners and office celebrations that didn't exist. I invited a few of his colleagues to lunch, framing it as casual networking just to see who would bite. And then I set the stage for the real move, the fake promotion dinner. I spent weeks planning it, crafting invitations that felt professional, convincing, and flattering. I made it about celebrating me, a milestone at work. But the real intent was something far sharper. I envisioned him walking into that restaurant, all charm and confidence, thinking he owned every eye, every chair, every table. He would sit at the head of the room, smiling for his colleagues, laughing with Lila perhaps, believing the night was his to enjoy. What he didn't know, what he could never anticipate, was the trap. Every detail was deliberate. The list of attendees, the timing of the meal, the cameras subtly capturing everything. By the time dessert arrived, by the time the wine glasses were raised, he would lose everything he thought he controlled. Each night leading up to it, I rehearsed in my head. What I would say, how I would say it. How I would watch him squirm without a single word of accusation. It was intoxicating. Not the anger, not the pain, but the clarity, the precision. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in months. Even my friends began to notice a change. Rachel remarked one evening over glasses of red wine, "You seem different. Stronger." I smiled, letting her think it was confidence. Half of it was that, yes, but the other half was far deeper. I had learned patience, observation, and control. I had learned to step outside the chaos of emotions and see the bigger picture. Mark noticed too. He began probing, asking casual questions about my days, where I had been, who I had seen. I answered carefully, never more than I needed to. My tone neutral, my smile polite. The subtle psychological revenge was working. He was starting to feel the distance I had felt for months. Sometimes late at night I would sit alone and replay every moment of the betrayal. I let the memory sting, but I didn't let it break me. Instead, I let it sharpen me, a weapon forged in grief and fury. The night before the dinner, I finalized my plans. Every guest confirmed, every detail in place. I even prepared a few small legal documents as insurance, quietly slipping them into my bag. It felt almost like theater, the way everything had to align for the moment to land perfectly. I looked at my reflection in the bedroom mirror, running a hand along my jawline. My eyes, red from restless nights, burned with focus. "You're ready," I whispered. "He won't see this coming." It was strange. The fear and the excitement mingled. I wasn't doing this for revenge in the petty sense. I wasn't going to yell or humiliate him publicly. I was doing this for me. For the control I had lost for too long. For the respect and dignity he had stolen with his lies. By the time I went to bed, I was exhausted in a way that felt good. Every step had been deliberate. every plan executed with care. I slept knowing the trap was set, knowing the stage was ready. And when I woke the next morning, the world seemed sharper, brighter, more alive. The ache of betrayal had transformed into a burning focus, a power I had never felt before. I could almost hear Mark in my head, smiling, unsuspecting, confident that the night would belong to him. Little did he know, by the time dessert was served, everything he thought he controlled would slip through his fingers. I smiled quietly to myself, sipping my coffee as the morning sun streamed in through the window. Calm, patient, and ready. He walked into that restaurant thinking he owned the room. But by the time dessert was served, he would lose everything. And I would be the one holding the pieces. The restaurant smelled like polished wood and candle wax, soft music floating through the warm air. I walked in first, letting the hostess guide me to the reserved table. My heels clicked lightly on the hardwood floor, every step measured, deliberate. I could feel the energy of the room, the quiet hum of conversation, the gentle clink of glasses, like electricity waiting to ignite. Mark followed, confident, all charm and ease. He didn't know what awaited him, and that made his swagger even more deliciously ridiculous. Lila trailed behind him, nervous energy radiating off her in subtle flares. She kept glancing at me as if realizing too late that she had walked into someone else's story. I greeted the few colleagues I'd invited, shaking hands, smiling politely, projecting the perfect image of a successful wife celebrating a career milestone. Inside, my pulse was steady. Outside, the world seemed ordinary. But beneath the surface, the storm I had been building for weeks was ready to break. The waiter arrived, carrying a silver tray with 2 flutes of champagne. I signaled him to place them in front of me. Everyone settled, drinks in hand, expecting a toast about promotions, about teamwork, about nothing. I stood, glass raised, and the room fell quiet. Even Mark, smug and slightly annoyed at the interruption, paused. To honesty, I began, voice calm, precise. To love and to new beginnings. Some heads tilted, a few smiles, the polite kind that waits to see what comes next. I smiled back, but inside I was perfectly still, fully composed. I pulled out my phone and tapped a few buttons. The screen glowed, projecting an image onto the small built-in screen of the conference room corner of the restaurant. It looked like a work presentation. The subtle pretense of professionalism disguised the chaos about to unfold. The first photo appeared. Cabin 12. Pinebrook Lake. Mark laughing in a t-shirt with Lila, her hand brushing his arm. The video played next. Longer, sharper, the moments of intimacy impossible to ignore. His laughter. Her smile. The casual touches, the flirtation, the betrayal laid bare. A murmur rose from the table. Phones whipped out. People leaned forward. Lila's face went pale, lips parting in shock. Mark froze. His eyes darted to me, a flash of panic replacing the smugness he carried in my mind for months. Emily, what is this? His voice wavered, unsteady. I smiled, perfectly composed, letting the calm in my tone do all the work. It's your business trip, Mark. Everyone should see what great teamwork looks like. Whispers cascaded through the restaurant. People leaned toward screens, recording, capturing every frame. I watched him try to grasp at the illusion he had built for so long. He opened his mouth, closed it again, words failing. Lila's hands flew to her mouth, her expression collapsing. She bolted, heels clicking on the hardwood as she vanished toward the exit, muttering excuses that no one could hear over the room's sudden hum. Mark's face paled. Sweat beaded along his temple, his composure evaporating in a way that made him seem smaller than I had ever seen him. I realized then that power is a tangible thing. You can feel it shift, weight it in the air, taste it on your tongue. And that moment, watching him crumble, I tasted it fully. Mark, I said, voice steady, almost gentle. Do you have anything to say? He opened his mouth again, stammering, turning red. Emily, it's not what it looks like. It looks exactly like what it is, I interrupted. You chose this. You chose to lie, to cheat, to betray. And now everyone knows. He sank into his chair, defeated, like a man whose world had collapsed but couldn't quite accept it yet. I noticed his shoulders slump, his hands shaking. All the arrogance, all the charm gone in the span of a minute. I turned to the table, smiling politely at the guests, some whispering to each other, others staring in wide-eyed disbelief. Thank you all for joining me, I said lightly, as if wrapping up a mundane business meeting. I hope this serves as a reminder that honesty is worth more than appearances. I paused. And that sometimes the truth doesn't need to be hidden. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the low hum of murmurs. I saw Mark glance around desperately, the realization of his exposure setting in. The hotel receipts, the cabin rental, the stolen glances, all invisible to the world until I decided to make them visible. For the first time he looked small, frail even. His carefully curated confidence, the mask he wore so effortlessly for years, shattered in an instant. And I didn't feel sorry. Not one bit. I returned to my seat, sipping my champagne, savoring the taste of vindication. Every word he might have thrown at me, every excuse, every apology fell flat. He was powerless and I had orchestrated it perfectly. I could see him trying to collect himself, muttering half-formed sentences to anyone who would listen, to spin the story in some way. But the damage was done. His colleagues, even those who barely knew the situation, had witnessed the reality. Lila had fled, and he had nowhere to hide. As I watched him unravel, a strange peace settled over me. This wasn't about revenge in the petty, angry sense anymore. This was about reclaiming myself, about demonstrating that deception, no matter how charming, has consequences. I leaned back, letting the tension leave my shoulders. I had planned every step, orchestrated every detail, and now finally I had taken control. But I knew the public confrontation was only half the story. The humiliation, the exposure was powerful. Yet the true weight of revenge, the part that would hurt him most, would come after. I watched him slump in his chair, silent now, the room buzzing around him with curiosity and judgment. And I whispered to myself, low and deliberate, savoring every heartbeat. The best part of my revenge isn't public. It comes after. And in that moment I realized how completely I had transformed. I was no longer the woman quietly watching her marriage disintegrate. I was the architect of the reckoning, calm, deliberate, and unstoppable. The night stretched ahead of me like a dark promise. Outside the restaurant, the world continued, unaware. But inside I had rewritten the rules. By the time dessert was served, Mark would realize the full cost of his choices. And when he finally faced me alone, he would understand the depth of the storm he had invited into our lives. I smiled quietly to myself. Every detail, every plan, every ounce of patience had led to this moment. The weight of betrayal had transformed into something stronger, sharper, and finally entirely mine. This was not the end. This was the moment the game truly began. Morning light streamed softly through the kitchen window, painting everything in gold. The house smelled faintly of coffee and clean linen. I sat at the small table by the window, a mug of steaming coffee warming my hands, and for the first time in years I felt calm. Truly calm. No tension twisting my stomach, no restless thoughts keeping me awake, no fear of what he was hiding. Mark's betrayal, the lies, the deceit, they were all behind me now. The divorce papers had been filed quietly, methodically. The finances were secured. Every ounce of leverage I had painstakingly gathered was in place. And his reputation? Shattered. Not with screaming or drama, but with precision, proof, and patience. By the time anyone realized the truth, it was too late for him to spin it back. I took a slow sip of coffee and let the silence stretch. There were birds singing outside, the faint rustle of leaves in the morning breeze, sunlight spilling across the hardwood floor. Everything felt ordinary, peaceful, and yet profoundly extraordinary because I had survived it all. Stronger, sharper, reborn. Revenge isn't loud. It isn't fireworks or yelling in a crowded room. It's the quiet after the storm when the chaos settles, and you can finally hear yourself again. That quiet, it hums with clarity, with freedom, with power reclaimed. I remembered the nights I had spent crying alone, the doubts that gnawed at me, the moments I questioned whether I had been imagining it all. And I smiled faintly, thinking how far I had come. I had lost love, yes, but I had found myself. Every carefully planned step, every act of patience and observation had led me here. Not to vengeance for its own sake, but to control, to dignity, to self-respect. The coffee was gone, replaced by a feeling I hadn't recognized in years. Lightness. I moved around the kitchen, opening cupboards, stacking plates, letting my hands do ordinary work while my mind finally rested. I could hear the birds outside, the soft creak of the window frame, and I realized I had missed this simple serenity while being trapped in the chaos of lies. I glanced at the mailbox and saw the final divorce papers stamped, filed, and complete. Everything in its rightful place. My life had returned to me piece by piece. And for the first time in a long time I allowed myself to breathe. But just when I thought I'd closed that chapter, just when the weight of betrayal had finally lifted, my phone buzzed on the counter. A message appeared from an unknown number. "We need to talk about Mark." I stared at it, the sunlight catching the screen, reflecting faintly in my eyes. My pulse quickened again. Curiosity, caution, and a spark of something else, sharper, alive. The storm might have passed, but I knew deep down that some storms don't ever fully end. They just shift shape. I set the coffee mug down, tracing the rim with my finger. A slow, deliberate smile crept across my face. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I was ready. Whatever this message meant, whatever shadow of him lingered, I knew one thing. I had the power now. And the next chapter, whenever it came, would be written on my terms. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was alive. I was free. I was me. Sometimes revenge isn't about making someone suffer the way they made you suffer. It's not about yelling, exposing, or breaking them piece by piece. Revenge, I learned, is quieter. It's about reclaiming your power piece by piece and holding it close until you realize it's yours to keep. I didn't need Mark to feel the pain I felt. I didn't need him to crumble in front of the world, though watching it unfold was undeniably satisfying. What I needed was to take my life back, to feel whole again, and to know that betrayal could not define me. If you've ever been lied to, deceived, or betrayed by someone you trusted, don't rush to strike back. Find your calm, gather your strength, and rebuild yourself first. Everything else, justice, closure, and sometimes revenge, will follow naturally in its own time. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have confronted him the moment you suspected the truth, or waited quietly, letting the pieces fall into place so the betrayal would expose itself? Could you have kept your composure while every ounce of trust was being torn apart? I want to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments. I read everyone and I promise no judgment. This story isn't just mine. It's about anyone who's ever been lied to, deceived, or betrayed. If you felt every heartbeat of this journey, if you shivered at the suspense and cheered at the payoff, make sure to subscribe. There are more real-life revenge stories coming. Stories that sting, stories that burn, and stories that remind us that sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one you least expect. Up next, he ruined my reputation, so I made him go viral.